be seated. It is a great honor and a great privilege to introduce to you the Governor of the State of Vermont, Madeleine M. Kunin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, members of the House and Senate, members of the administration, and all others who are listening in. The budget of the state of Vermont is more than a set of numbers. It is a statement of values. It is the armature which supports the rhetoric of politics. I have built this budget for fiscal year 1988 on three fundamental principles. First, that we must adhere to the discipline we acquired last year and permit no more deficits to occur. Second, that we must continue to strengthen the Vermont economy and create more good jobs for Vermonters. And third, that we must open a door out of poverty and provide humane support for those who, through no fault of their own, have to depend on government. Now, we all enjoy a sense of accomplishment in having shed the albatross of the deficit which plagued us for the last 6 years. My 1988 budget will pay off the last vestige of those days of debt, the bond owed to the Vermont Futures Program. It will be reason to celebrate and will be a reminder that our first responsibility to the people of the state of Vermont is to live within our means. We have a surplus. Our revenues are better than predicted. Unemployment is low, job growth is high, but we must never allow ourselves to live beyond our means again. Now, while many are willing to extend us credit to do so, the cost in interest and lost financial reputation is enormous. Instead of using our scarce public funds for services to Vermonters, we use them to pay out-of-state financial institutions. Instead of producing the dependable financial stability on which Vermont businesses and taxpayers depend, we threaten them with crisis and tax increases to pay off deficits. And if we increase spending this year, as much as some would like, we will have to sustain that growth in the future, more leaner years. This budget, therefore, is structured not only to avoid a deficit in the next fiscal year, but to be affordable in the future, regardless of economic fluctuations which are inevitable. I propose a general fund budget of $456.7 million, which represents a 6.9% increase or a 2.5% increase in real dollars beyond inflation. I believe these numbers will support the three principles that I have outlined: fiscal responsibility, a strong economy, and a compassionate government. This level of spending also allows us to cut taxes by $4 million. This tax cut will come on top of the $19 million Vermonters will save in fiscal year 1988 because the deficit was retired and the income tax surcharge eliminated. Let me explain. If we do nothing, because the federal tax law is coming incrementally, the tax law will cut our income taxes for us once again by $2 million in fiscal year 1988 and $4 million in fiscal year 1989. I believe that we can do more for the welfare of the people of the state of Vermont if we take positive action instead of letting this tax cut be enacted passively. I believe we should keep our income tax revenue neutral. It is progressive and should be maintained at its current level. An article in today's paper puts Vermont in an excellent position in that regard, that we are in fact progressive in the way we levy our income tax. The tax commissioner and the Joint Fiscal Committee, as you recall, had to make the last income tax adjustment because of uncertainties in the future. This time I will ask you, the legislature, to make it. Instead of cutting income taxes, I will ask you to take the resulting $4 million in revenues and provide tax cuts in two vital areas: property taxes and an archaic business tax policy. The primary goal is to further the reform process of the property tax system. Over the last 2 sessions, we, and you, the legislature, have dramatically increased funding for the property tax relief program to eliminate the regressivity of that tax for those earning below $32,000. In fact, we have doubled the rebates, but the job is not done. I propose that you make 2 further adjustments in the program to reduce the property tax burden. First, I recommend that we eliminate the $750 ceiling on property tax relief payments. That will cost us about $1.1 million annually, and it will mean that no Vermont family with an income under $32,000 has to pay more than 5% of their income for property taxes. This also implements a key element of the Vermont Foundation Plan. Second, I recommend that we change the percentage of rent we attribute to property taxes from 20% to 24%. That change will increase by 2/3 the benefits we provide to renters. It will respond to the escalation in rents around the state by providing almost $2 million more per capita to low-income Vermont renters. The other area I propose a tax cut is in business taxes. As you know, in 1988, we will eliminate the surcharge on the corporate income tax, totaling a savings of $1 million. But I believe we should do more. The Commission on State Tax Policy, created by the legislature, has looked closely at the tax structure, and I anticipate, though their formal report is not out, that they will recommend a change in our corporate income to change what is called the apportionment formula. Under that change, sales by corporations doing business in more than one state will be allocated to the state in which the goods are delivered rather than the state from which the goods are shipped. Currently, Vermont is the only state in the Union that apportions that differently on the origin basis rather than the destination basis. The continued use of the origin basis causes unnecessary complications and confusion. I believe this change will substantially help our business climate in attracting and keeping multi-state corporations that provide good jobs in Vermont. Even as we cut taxes, we must build up our margin against deficits and continue strategies like the Graham-Rudman Fund. I'm proud that acting together we created the Graham-Rudman Fund and filled it to $8 million through transfer of the surplus and appropriations and proceeds from the highly successful tax collection program. While the brunt of the federal cuts, fortunately, have not materialized, the fund will continue to enable us to make up some federal cuts that otherwise would have a devastating effect on services. We have endured the first year of the Graham-Rudman-Hollings law primarily because it turned out to be a paper tiger. Based on this experience, I recommend that we retain the fund but expand its usage to include up to $3 million in funding for the transition from the current state aid formula to the formula of the Vermont Foundation Plan that I outlined in my inaugural address. The amount not used for state aid should be left in place as a hedge against further cuts. If the probability of further cuts increases as the federal budget is being built, we can continue to divert some of our tax collection proceeds back into the fund. There is one area in which I recommend that we take a risk and authorize a new futures program, building upon the strengths of that program as it was designed in 1983, but with a new direction that fits the challenges of 1987. In 1983, when we faced high unemployment in certain areas of the state, we invested in the future by issuing bonds to create a public works employment program. These bonds come due in fiscal year 1988 and will be paid out of the 1987 surplus. That gives us the opportunity, however, to reissue bonds within the 90% rule for major needs we see in 1987. These needs are threefold. One, agricultural financing, development of startup businesses through incubators, and preservation of agricultural lands and low-income housing. I will present specific programs in each area and ask that you use capital financing to fund these programs. They represent investments in the future economic development and quality of life in the state, and we must make those decisions for the next generation. I believe they are worthy successors to the 1983 Future Program. As we examine budget growth in the last 2 years overall and project budget growth in the future, a clear pattern emerges, and I would ask you to look at that. We are sending more money each year in education funding and other services directly back to the communities. In 1988, state government will return more than $181 million directly to the cities and towns and school districts. This is $27.5 million more than just 2 years ago. Next year, over 30% of the state resources will be returned to those communities. Bureaucracy, meanwhile, at the state level is holding steady. And frankly, that is precisely the right course. Increasingly, the function of state government is returning tax dollars to provide greater support for equal opportunities at the local level. Let us examine the second principle, which disciplines this budget: sustaining and building a strong Vermont economy, which means good jobs for Vermonters. Now, we have to think about the future in this budget because, in a sense, it's a blueprint. And if we are to foster economic growth into the year 2000, which is just 12 fiscal years away, we must budget for the substantive investments which matter in today's international economy. Just as the world economy has drastically changed in the last 5 years, so have the strategies that create good jobs. And it is time that both government and business fully acknowledge these dramatic shifts. Last week I noted that the Wall Street Journal published an article entitled, "How is the Business Climate? It Depends on the Scorekeeper." The report said that an organization called SRI, a research organization, has studied what produces a good business climate. And it isn't what people have always traditionally thought it to be. It isn't necessarily low labor costs or lax environmental policies. Instead, SRI focused on policies such as state spending on education, such as interstate banking, such as access to technology. I believe it is essential for business and government in Vermont to jointly support these significant long-term investment strategies because they will determine our ability to create and retain good jobs in the future. And we must recognize that these investments are, in fact, pro-business. This budget reflects that reality. In addition to funding the Vermont Foundation Plan to create equal educational opportunities for all Vermont school children, I ask you to support other major education initiatives. One, $500,000 for 20 community-based early education programs for 4-year-olds. And the last 20 years, Head Start has proven to be a success. And disadvantaged children who have enrolled have, through Head Start kinds of programs, received an equal start with their classmates. In Vermont, the fact is only 20% of the children eligible for Head Start are enrolled. This initiative that I propose over a 5-year period will enable every Head Start eligible child to be in such a program and get an equal start. I recommend $500,000 for a Second Chance program to encourage schools to develop alternative programs to prevent dropouts and to encourage existing dropouts to return and get their diplomas. An element of choice is key to the proposal. It will be up to the student to choose the school or program which meets his or her needs. $500,000 for a school improvement fund, which will provide grants to schools and classroom teachers to improve the quality of education. Higher education will form partnerships with public schools to implement this program. On the credit side of the ledger, I will ask you to enact a central purchasing system for schools, estimated to save some $3 million through bulk purchases and competitive bidding. As we look towards Vermont's future, we must also pay particular attention to our higher education resources. Repeatedly, experts who examine the resurgence of the New England economy conclude that access to higher education is critical. And frankly, we're most fortunate in Vermont to have an extensive system of private and public colleges and universities. Through the Higher Education Planning Commission and the EPSCoR Basic Research Program, which you helped to fund last year, I will continue to promote strong ties between our business community and higher education. We will continue to meet the challenge to maintain support for higher education and to meet the needs of Vermonters pursuing post-secondary studies. I recommend that we increase spending for the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation by more than 7% next year. I recommend support for the University of Vermont comparable to our efforts last year, including $175,000 to help equip the ambitious new Center for Microbiology and Agricultural Science, an endeavor leading to practical benefits for farmers and consumers. I'm recommending an $827,000 increase for the Vermont State College system. The system warrants our strong continuing commitment. Therefore, I recommend that we again strengthen the library resources for their students across the state. Now, I ask the business community to join the environmental community in continuing to make Vermont an outstanding environmental quality state, a state in which people do want to live and work. We've learned in Vermont that pollution controls and environmental regulations are ultimately good for business. And it's time to stop viewing each environmental initiative as an anti-business initiative. At the same time, environmentalists need to stop viewing each business initiative with suspicion. Let me be precise. I ask you to form a united front as we tackle environmental problems such as solid waste. Both the environmental and economic consequences of failure to act in this area are evident. Cities and towns desperately need assistance from the state to develop safer disposal systems. I will ask for $1 million this year to help municipalities plan for improved solid waste programs. And I will ask for $5 million in each of the next 10 years to fulfill our obligations to reduce the volume of waste generated and to dispose of it. My budget calls for new positions in the Water Resources Department to investigate hazardous waste sites. The federal government has been too slow in responding to Vermont's problems in this area. My capital budget includes $850,000 to begin work on a new laboratory in Waterbury to improve services offered by the Environmental Agency and Agriculture. You will learn more about other environmental initiatives, including a rivers policy for the state of Vermont through separate legislation. The environmental ethic and the entrepreneurial spirit of Vermont will be better served with a new focus on the permitting process. This budget contains a carefully targeted plan to save both time and money while holding firm on environmental standards. And I invite both environmentalists and business groups to join hands and break bread together on this issue. First, the business community will be asked to pay increased fees for many permits, and in return will receive a guarantee from government. And the guarantee will read, if you do not receive your permit or license within a specified period of time, you'll get your money back. A money-back guarantee. Under this new system, state government is taking a pledge to adhere to a fixed time schedule, and only the most rare of circumstances will permit deviation from that schedule. It's a good deal. In return for increased fees, applicants will receive efficiency and accountability. The fees will enable the state to also improve its education program for applicants, open a pilot regional office in Pittsford, which will unite several permit operations under one roof. Both efforts should remove much of the frustration that has accompanied our strict environmental regulations. Further immediate steps to make Vermont a better state for business startups will include the following: interstate banking. Our ability to provide a competitive climate for financial services for both business and consumers will heavily influence our ability to create jobs. And these are good, high-paying jobs, and we should do all we can to encourage them. Next, 3 Vermont Enterprise Centers designed to generate new businesses in incubator space with built-in support services funded by a $2 million appropriation from the Capital Fund. The creation of a Vermont Development Foundation, a public-private partnership funded by a $100,000 appropriation to be matched with private funds to encourage businesses to enter the state. Establishment of a tourism advertising fund based on the public-private partnership concept, creating a new pool of $300,000, one-half public funds and one-half private, to be administered with the advice of a new board. Preliminary funding for something called Vermont Heritage 91, which you're going to hear more about, designed to develop several state-owned historic sites into major tourist attractions in time for the 1991 bicentennial of statehood. The benefits will also be educational for Vermont school children. Additional staff to increase the number of captive insurance companies in Vermont, a source of much intensified business activity where Vermont today is in the lead and must maintain that special position. $150,000 for telecommunications study to enable the state to have a cost-efficient, modern telecommunications system essential to our future economic growth. In addition, if we are to truly maintain a vibrant economy, we must do all that we can at the state level to support agriculture. Our farmers are perhaps our most productive members of the workforce, and they need a good income, a fair income, if they are to survive. Today I ask you to support a new position in the agriculture budget to allow the new commissioner there to hire an agricultural economist. This will enable the department to take a leading role in the fight to change the milk market order and to get higher prices for our dairy farmers. It will also give us the help we need to protect the credit available to this region. I will ask the legislature to enact a Vermont Land Conservation and Housing Fund based on the $2 million capital fund I referred to earlier, and a farm loan program also supported by a $2 million capital appropriation. The loan program will be administered by a separate agricultural development board similar to the Vermont Industrial Development Authority. Through these 2 programs, for the first time, we will be providing agriculture equal status with manufacturing and tourism. Without our open spaces, without farmers who groom the landscape, Vermont would lose its essential character, and we cannot permit that to happen. The Conservation Fund will permit the state to leverage private funds to keep agricultural land open and to preserve scenic areas, as well as expand the availability of housing. In this budget, as you review it, you will note a substantial increase in the current use program. An appropriation of $7.2 million is required for the coming fiscal year to meet the increased demand of both the agricultural and forestry sectors, which were expanded last legislative session. This represents a 250% increase since 1986. I will support legislation to improve the administration of the current use program and to relieve local listers of some of the burdens of the program. I'm confident that improved administration will pay for itself in savings in revenue collection. Further, I believe that new administration will save funds in future years as we create a better capacity to measure use values. I support these changes to strengthen, not weaken this program, because it is accomplishing well its twin goals of maintaining productive farm and forest land and easing some property tax burdens. A continued strong Vermont economy, one that invests in education, respects Vermont's environmental values and agricultural traditions is important first for job creation. That's why we chose those priorities. But there is another benefit that we must recognize to a strong economy. It provides the stable revenues necessary to provide the services and benefits upon which the public depends. In recent years, our capacity to provide protection to the public has not kept pace with the population growth and crime statistics. To ensure that we have adequate protection, I recommend the addition of 15 state troopers. I also propose a three-part plan to improve services to state and local police departments. These include substantially improve the staff and equipment resources of the State Police Forensic Laboratory, increase staff and instructional support for the Vermont Police Academy in Pittsford, complete the communication system linking state and local police to the state and national computer systems for motor vehicle, missing persons, and other law enforcement data. The federal government, as you know, has embarked on a new anti-drug program with components for education, treatment, and law enforcement. I recommend that we accept these funds and appropriate the match required by federal law. Some of these funds will be passed through to local government, and we will provide half the local match required. I will recommend a comprehensive program to allocate these funds, one use of which will be to establish a system of intensive probation and house arrest for suitable offenders. This will conserve scarce correctional resources for the most serious offenders and will also ensure communities the security they deserve. These funds are only contingent on federal approval. As we turn to human services, let me state the goals which guided my decisions. First, I have sought to promote initiatives which would enable Vermonters to step out of the welfare system once and for all. And second, for those who must rely on government assistance, I've sought humane levels of support. Today we know for a fact that with assistance, many families who had been dependent on welfare are able to support themselves. The REACH-UP program, still in its early stages, is producing dramatic results which corroborate that. The next year will determine the full success of this program. I believe that in addition to federal funds, we must use state funds and make our own commitment to expand the REACH-UP program. Therefore, I recommend spending an additional $250,000 on this program. When we concentrate on strategies to help Vermonters become independent, we know that child care services play a critical role. In this budget, I recommend a major increase in funding for child care services, both in the fee scale to allow more parents to participate and in payments to providers. I asked for an additional $1.6 million for child care. In the last 2 years, we have nearly tripled this budget from $1.1 million to a proposed level of $3.1 million. But I believe it is the best investment in families that we can make. Despite our best efforts, we know that in Vermont there are families with inadequate food and shelter. The experience of the Hunger Task Force and our own housing study have pointed out these inadequacies. This is unacceptable. We have begun to address some of the recommendations of the Hunger Task Force through the Department of Education, but there's more to do. The task force recommended improved outreach services to improve participation, increase participation in nutrition programs, particularly food stamps. I recommend that we start a pilot outreach program in the 3 northeastern counties. Unfortunately, the Reagan administration does not share Vermont's compassion in this regard. And I do not believe that the Congress will make all the spending cuts advocated by the President, but to keep Vermont programs intact, I have, as noted earlier, budgeted for the continuation of the Graham-Rudman Contingency Fund. I've also included, you will note, $1.4 million in the budget to offset lost federal funds for the Vermont State Hospital and to begin the challenge of providing regionalized mental health care for Vermonters who need hospitalization. If we are able to obtain recertification, and we will make every effort to do so for the hospital, we will use the full sum instead to accelerate regional services and substantially reduce the hospital population. As the federal government abandons its role in low-income housing, the state of Vermont must step in with innovative programs and also to encourage the private sector to meet the growing need for housing. In addition to relief for renters, I am seeking legislation to enable the Housing Finance Agency to provide mortgage credit certificates for home buyers. In bringing together the Housing Finance Agency, the Housing Authority, the Housing Division of the Agency and Development Affairs in a working group, formal working group, we will maximize coordination of housing services within state government. For example, there is a new law on the books that allows tax credit for low-income housing developments, and this group will help direct that benefit to the area of greatest need. Vermonters in need will also benefit from inflation adjustments in the budget in all benefit programs. We cannot let inflation eat away at essential services. To recognize our state employees, I recommend a pay act of $6 million from the general fund. This will allow us to complete our transition to the new system of Willis classification of pay grades. We are, in fact, a national model of how to implement pay equity by cooperation of labor and management. I particularly wish to thank our state workers and their representative, the Vermont State Employees Association, for finding ways to make the system work for the benefit of all. And I'm certain that we'll be rewards for many years to come from greater productivity, particularly for our women workers. To follow up on this effort, I have included in my budget funds for a governor's conference on women. We will review our progress since the last conference on women was held 10 years ago, celebrate our achievements, and set new goals. Finally, I propose a transportation fund budget of $111 million, an increase of 4.7% when adjusted for this year's one-time enhancements. The budget includes $9.5 million to maintain the 1988 construction schedule without borrowing for this purpose, thus again avoiding the 20-year burden which transportation bonds entail. It will also enable us to initiate an aggressive program to audit the tax compliance of out-of-state trucking firms. The Motor Vehicle Department budget includes money for computers to help improve its customer services. The transportation network has long been the backbone of Vermont's public infrastructure. I am pleased to sustain and strengthen those systems and to provide for improved services. Since so much of this speech has been devoted to investing in the quality of life here in Vermont, it is vital that we carry that theme truly home into our own state buildings. I propose that 1% of the capital cost of building or renovating state offices be dedicated to purchasing Vermont art or crafts to grace these spaces. As you review the separate line items of the budget, I urge you also to recognize the connections between these areas. I have already stressed the linkage between education and the economy, between the environment and the economy. There continues to be a strong necessity for strong partnership between the public and private sectors. As we develop social support programs, for example, in the Agency of Human Services, we must also continue to engage the private sector, which has enormous power to effect change. For example, expanded health care benefits, child care benefits, good wages, investment in housing will do much to ease the stress on the public purse and will also increase the productivity of the labor force. My recommendations, for example, for the increased travel industry promotion budget depends to a large degree on that spirit of cooperation between the public and private sectors. The three principles I've outlined, fiscal responsibility, a strong economy, and a compassionate state government will guide us in this fiscal year. It is essential that we make good investments on behalf of the people of our state. When you stop and think about it, perhaps no responsibility of government is greater than that of spending wisely the hard-earned tax dollars of the working men and women of Vermont. In each instance, we must be absolutely certain that our expenditures are essential, that the public benefits as a result, and that our books will be balanced. The budget I'm presenting to you today is one which we can afford and which will also enable us to meet our commitments to the men, women, and children of the state of Vermont. Thank you.
Will the committee please reassemble and escort the governor from the chamber?
The governor being escorted out of the House of Representatives now following her budget address. This program has come to you from the Capitol building in Montpelier. The governor's budget address from the State House. This has been a special report on your public access channel, Channel 15.